Chapter 16 of Nip and Tuck by a Self-Made Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 16. Nip and Tuck Combine in Business. The first thing Tuck did next morning was to visit a magistrate and swear out a warrant for Roger Savage. Accompanied by a plainclothes man, Tuck went to the neighborhood of the deserted building and waited for the broker to make his appearance, as he had intimated he would. Between 9 and 10 o'clock, Mr. Savage was seen coming down 161st Street from the direction of 3rd Avenue. "Are you Mr. Roger Savage of 69 Wall Street?" asked the officer. "I don't know you, sir," said the operator brusquely. "You haven't answered my question," persisted the detective. "Well, I am Mr. Savage. What then?" "I have a warrant for your arrest, and shall have to ask you to accompany me to the station." "What?" exclaimed the stout broker in a blustering tone. "I guess you made a mistake in your man." "No mistake at all, Mr. Savage," said the voice of George Tuck. The operator staggered back as if he had been struck a blow. "You here?" "Yes, sir," replied the boy cheerfully. "Now I think I'll treat you to a dose of your own medicine. What's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander." The detective drew out of his pocket a pair of steel bracelets, and at the sight of them the haughty broker collapsed completely. 15 minutes later he was in a cell at the station. Subsequently he was taken before a magistrate and remanded, and later in the day he was conveyed down to the Tombs. Next morning he was brought up for examination, which, by advice of counsel, he waived, and was then admitted to bail. The afternoon papers had a story of the kidnapping of George Tuck, though the young broker made no statement as to the stout broker's object. The affair set Wall Street to talking, and Tuck held a sort of levee at his office after the exchange closed for the day. The legal victory of the Chesapeake and Fairleigh Railroad sent the stock of that company up to 20. There was little of the stock in the market, chiefly small lots which passed from hand to hand. The bulk of the stock was in the hands of either the Savage clique or the Jarrett combine, neither, however, having actually acquired control. Both had been after the block of 20,500 shares, now in Tuck's possession, which had been held for a long time by an old gentleman named Davis, whose death had thrown it into the hands of Bloodgood, Shipley and Company for sale. This fact having been discovered early by Roger Savage, he had bought an option on it, pending the decision of the Virginia Court of Appeals. 4 days later, Duncan Jarrett returned to New York, and Tuck called at his office and offered him the block of Chesapeake and Fairleigh stock at the market price, which was now 26 3/4. It is needless to say that though the price had gone up a matter of 11 points since Mr. Jarrett had left the city, and the advance represented nearly $250,000, he was delighted to get hold of the shares. He and his associates would now come into control of the road, as well as a valuable concession which had been claimed by the Virginia Coal and Iron Company. The sale netted Tuck $205,000, raising his bank balance to $665,000. Nip, on Tuck's advice, had bought all the Chesapeake and Fairleigh stock he could get a hold of, something like 5,000 shares at an average price of 22, and held on to it for a further rise. The day after Tuck sold the block of stock to Mr. Jarrett, the grand jury handed in an indictment against Roger Savage for kidnapping and assault, and he was rearrested and compelled to give much larger bail pending his trial. His 2 accomplices had also been let out on bail, furnished through business associates of Mr. Savage. But when the indictments were found against them, they could not be located. When their names were called in court, they failed to respond. Consequently, their bail was forfeited, and detectives were sent out to look them up. The Christmas holidays came and passed. On the 3rd of January, it was announced in the newspapers that at the annual meeting of the Chesapeake and Fairleigh Railroad Company, a new board of directors had been chosen, who in turn elected Duncan Jarrett president of the road. Next day, Nip unloaded his C&F holdings at $8 a share, clearing something over $40,000 on the deal. The combined profits of Nip and Tuck, the boy brokers, since they had gone into business on their own hook, now amounted to over $1 million, a very handsome showing, especially when it is considered that their combined capital at starting was less than $10,000 cash. Soon after the change of management in the C&F, Nip and Tuck simultaneously noticed a stiffening of Chesapeake and Ohio stock on the market. This stock had been depressed by a bear clique some little time before, and was selling around 49. Both boys put on their thinking caps, and the result of their deliberations was that both of them, without the other's knowledge, began buying C&O at 50. They had each accumulated about 15,000 shares on the margin deal when the news came out in the public prints that the C&O had leased the Chesapeake and Fairleigh Road, and that an arrangement had been entered into with the Virginia Coal and Iron Company by which further litigation would be avoided and the C&O would come into possession of valuable privileges. This announcement, even before confirmation, caused a boom in C&O stock, and brokers on the floor of the exchange fought each other to get some of it. C&O rapidly advanced from 52 to 60, with every indication that the price would run much higher. Other rumors regarding the advantages of this arrangement between C&O and the VC&I Company sent the stock towards 70, and both Nip and Tuck saw another rich haul in sight for them. About this time the trial of Roger Savage came on, and of course George Tuck was the main witness against the broker. Savage had been confident of breaking down the evidence of the boy for want of corroboration. He and his lawyers, eminent counsel by the way, had not the slightest suspicion that Nicholas Nip had any connection with the case. Tuck had been exceedingly close-mouthed with the reporters, and the fact that Nip had gone before the grand jury was not known outside the district attorney's office. The result was that after Tuck had gone on the stand and testified, and had been badgered and bully-ragged by the lawyers for the defense, without, however, materially weakening his evidence, Nip was produced, and what he had to say under oath was a complete surprise to the prisoner and his counsel. The jury was not long in returning a verdict of guilty against the stout man, and he was sent to a cell in the Tombs. Bail was placed at a large amount, but he got it, pending an appeal from the trial court. Enough came out of the trial to make very unpleasant reading in the report of the case in the papers, for Lawyer Dexter and the Virginia judge both had their integrity assailed. Eventually the verdict was sustained, and Broker Savage had to go to Sing Sing, but money and a powerful pull got him pardoned inside of a year. Nip and Tuck cleaned up $500,000 between them out of the C&O boom, besides making several $1,000s for the Misses Laura Joyce and Mira Clark. That the two girls appreciated the smartness as well as the personal advantages of the young brokers may be assumed, for it shortly afterward became known among the friends of each that Tuck was engaged to Laura and Nip to Mira. After the trial of Roger Savage, Tuck proposed to Nip that they go into partnership. To this proposal Nip immediately agreed, and 1 week later the offices were combined, and the new sign which at once appeared on the bulletin board of the New Era building read, Nip and Tuck, Stocks and Bonds. The end. End of Chapter 16. End of Fame and Fortune Weekly, Number 9. Published by Frank Tousey. Recording by Keith Salis.